You walk into Toys R Us. It's 2005. The aisles are full. The shelves are stocked. The company is profitable. But the people who just bought it are not going to keep it alive. They're going to make it pay for its own purchase. And then they're going to keep pulling money out until there isn't any left. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how a $6.6 billion leverage buyout turned a 70-year-old retailer with 20% US market share into a corpse, without Amazon laying a finger on it. But first, let me show you the machine. In July 2005, three private equity buyers, Bain Capital, KKR, and Vornado Realty Trust, agreed to buy Toys R Us for $6.6 billion. Here's the part nobody mentions. The buyers themselves only put up $1.3 billion of their own money. The other $5.3 billion came from loans. The catch? Those loans weren't on the buyer's books. They were on the company's books. Toys R Us, the toy store, was now legally responsible for the debt of its own acquisition. This is called a leveraged buyout. The trick is in the word leveraged. Imagine you want to buy a house. Normally you'd put down 20%, say $80,000 on a $400,000 home, and the bank lends you the rest. You owe the bank. Now imagine the same deal, but you make the house pay back the bank. The house pays the mortgage every month from rent it collects. You collect what's left. That's the LBO. The company is the house. Toys R Us was paying back Bain and KKR's purchase from its own cash register. How much was Toys R Us paying? About $400 million a year, in interest alone. For context, pre-buyout Toys R Us had net income of $252 million a year. The interest alone was bigger than every penny the company had ever earned. But the buyers had a workaround. The company could stop investing in its own stores. Capital expenditures, store renovations, IT systems, e-commerce, were cut and cut. The website became a joke. The store started looking tired. Sales held, barely, but the experience was rotting. Stop for a second. Here is the number to remember. $400 million per year, every year, for 13 years. $5.2 billion in interest payments. That money did not buy a single toy. It did not pay a single store clerk. It did not fund a single website upgrade. It went straight to the people who loaned the buyers the money to buy the company. The lenders were paid in full. Every quarter. Without fail. You'd think, fine, the lenders get paid. The owners take the company's profits, slowly, while paying off the debt. That's the deal. That's not what happened. Here's the trick. In 2007, 2 years after buying the company, Bain, KKR, and Vornado approved a special transaction called a dividend recapitalization. Here's how a dividend recap works. The company takes out a new loan. But the loan proceeds don't go into the business. They don't pay for store upgrades, or new inventory, or staff. They go straight to the owners. As a cash dividend. The 2007 recap pulled approximately $800 million out of Toys R Us to the same people who had only put in $1.3 billion to buy it 2 years earlier. In 2012, they did it again. Another loan. Another dividend. Another large slice extracted from the company. By the time both recaps were done, the buyers had pulled out more in dividends than they had put in as equity. On paper, before the bankruptcy even started, they were already net positive on the deal. And the debt? Still there. Bigger, actually. Because the recap had stacked more debt onto Toys R Us to fund the dividends. Stop. If you're keeping score, the buyers paid $1.3 billion to enter the deal. They pulled out roughly $1.5 billion in dividends across 2 recaps. The company they bought was still alive. They just hadn't killed it yet. Even better, Toys R Us still had over 20% market share of US toy sales in 2017. The brand was still working. Now I want you to meet the people who were not in those boardrooms. Toys R Us had about 31,000 full-time employees in the US when the bankruptcy filings began. A lot of them, long-tenured store managers, distribution workers, were vested in the company pension plan. By 2017, that pension plan was underfunded by about $265 million. Here's where the math gets uncomfortable. The 2007 and 2012 dividend recaps pulled roughly $1.5 billion out of the company. 5.5 times more than the pension shortfall. If the owners had skipped one of those dividends, the pension would have been fully funded. Easily. They did not skip the dividends. In 2018, after the company liquidated, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, a U.S. federal agency, had to step in and assume responsibility for the pensions. About 30,000 current and former employees ended up depending on a government insurance backstop instead of the pension they were promised. So here is what actually happened, in one sentence. A working retailer was sold to 3 private equity firms. Those firms put $5.3 billion of debt onto the retailer. The retailer paid $400 million a year, every year, in interest, to the lenders. The firms pulled $1.5 billion in dividends out of the retailer, to themselves. The retailer stopped investing in itself, no e-commerce, no store renovations, no IT modernization, because every dollar was already promised to a lender or an owner. When the cash flow couldn't even cover the interest anymore, the company filed for bankruptcy in September 2017. By early 2018, the entire chain was liquidating. 800 US stores closed. 31,000 jobs gone. The owners had already collected their money years earlier. The obvious read is that private equity killed Toys R Us. The honest read is more uncomfortable. The system wasn't broken. It worked exactly as designed. An LBO converts a business into a debt service machine. The dividend recap routes the company's future cash flows back to the owners. Pension underfunding becomes a public expense. The retailer becomes a vessel. And the hidden part, the part most coverage skips, is that none of this required malice. It required structure. Toys R Us did not die because Amazon was better. It died because the people who bought it engineered a structure where their best financial outcome was the slow extraction of every dollar the company would ever earn. Subscribe if you want the next one, there's a lot more hidden in plain sight. I'll see you in the notes.